Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Stephanie Bree, and for this episode of the Video Game Collector's Guide series, I have the misfortune of talking about the infamous TurboGrafx 16. This one is a bane for collectors for a couple of reasons, which I will get into briefly. Um, First, let's talk a little bit about the system, who's it for, and who's interested in this thing. Um, this one has not got a major audience. So the people who are most likely looking for physical TurboGrafx hardware or looking to experience the TurboGrafx software are gamers that have a tremendous affinity for the 8-bit and 16-bit era and aren't satisfied with what they can get from Nintendo and Sega and even Atari in that realm. So they want more, right? I would also say it's probably going to appeal to the completist, the video game collector that has to own everything, at least in terms of, hardware. They might not have to own literally every game on every machine, but they want to own some games on every machine. So that's most likely who is going to be interested in a TurboGrafx 16. Also, any kid who had and I will say the term misfortune of owning one as a kid. And I don't mean that to be facetious or belittling you as a gamer if you owned one, necessarily. It's just they didn't have that many games. They really didn't. And frankly, most of the games were not good. And I say this as someone who's unbiased. I didn't have one as a kid, so I'm not tainted by nostalgia. I'm not blinded by nostalgia. Like, oh my god, I got one on my 7th birthday or my 10th Christmas or whatever. This is the greatest thing ever. I'm having fun, because you're not. No one was. And the only reason why you think you were is because if you got it for Christmas or a birthday at a formative time in your year, that has imprinted on your brain. But if you grow up with it, objectively, the games on the TurboGrafx 16 really aren't that great. Now, I may exaggerate the exact numbers a little bit, but let's talk a little bit about the numbers. There were exactly 94 titles released for the TurboGrafx 16 in the US. Again, TurboGrafx 16 was only released in the US. The PC Engine is a totally separate machine with a totally separate software library. That's Japan. That's a whole other thing, and I'll try to do a series of videos on some of the Japanese hardware, but I try to focus on a US, North America base, because that's where I grew up, and that's what I think my audience is. That's who most of my people watching these videos are. But if you haven't, and no, I apologize if you're in the UK, this machine was never localized to the UK. The company, for all intents and purposes, more or less went out of business or exited the video game hardware before they got around to getting it into the European market. It was a bomb, a total dud in the US. It was a moderate success in Japan, but worldwide as a whole, it was a total failure. And it cost NEC and Hudson Soft a lot of money and put them in a bad place financially. So let's focus on the US market. There were 94 titles released for the TurboGrafx 16. Now, if you want to spend a fortune buying the Turbo CD and getting the 125 or so, or not 125, excuse me, I take that back, the 40 or so games that were released for the CD add-on, you can bring your total software library up in the US up to about 125, give or take. But the vast majority, probably like 80 to 85% of the titles released on the TurboGrafx in the US were by Hudson Soft. Now, Hudson Soft did their best. You got to give them credit. They did their best, but they're no Nintendo, they're no Sega. They didn't have the output and the resources to be able to maintain a steady flow of software alongside, a steady stream of third-party games to keep people interested, because there were no third parties on the TurboGrafx-16 to speak of. A handful of third-party games made an appearance, but again, this comes up a lot in this time period. It goes back to the illegal monopolistic contracts Nintendo forced companies to sign in order to get their games on the NES. Which is going to be a whole in-depth video one of these days, the trials and tribulations of Nintendo and why third-party companies don't like to work with them. I am doing actual research for that one. Or trying to, at the very least. But let's talk about the TurboGrafx-16. Let's say you are insane and you already own every NES title ever made, and every SMS title ever made, and every 7800 title, I guess, and you decide, I want more 8-bit games, and someone points you to the TurboGrafx-16, and you decide you want the TurboGrafx-16. Here's a few things you need to know. Of the 94 games that were released on the system, only a handful have ever been re-released elsewhere. So that's step one. Point one. You're not going to be able to get very many of them on the eShops or the PlayStation Networks or Steam or GOG or whatever. Some of the big heavy hitters you'll find, but not a lot. A lot of the games that you're going to hear, the so-called hidden gems, which on the TurboGrafx-16 basically just means it's a functional game, is a hidden gem. Oh, this game actually works and isn't buggy and bonkers and weird and ugly and graphically devoid of any reason to own it. And be like, hey, I'm actually impressed, even though I shouldn't be, because on any other system this game wouldn't be impressive, but I digress. I'm not a fan, obviously, of the TurboGrafx. There's a personal story. I'll do a whole video on the TurboGrafx, why I hate it. There actually is a reason, but we'll get into it later. But, hardware. There's only 3 variations of hardware that I know of that you can buy that are compatible with TurboGrafx software. The original TurboGrafx-16, the Turbo Duo, which plays TG16 and TurboGrafx CD games, and the Turbo Express. Now, I'm treating the Turbo Express like a separate thing, its own entity, and I'm treating this the Turbo CD as its own separate thing. So we're not talking about the CD units right now. I think there were 2 or 3 more redesigns in Japan of the PC Engine. So I'm gonna put those out there. You can look into that as a possibility if you're looking for hardware, because fortunately, if I'm not mistaken, the TurboGrafx and the PC Engine are both region free. So you should be able to buy PC Engine games from Japan, and they should be able to play on your TurboGrafx-16. And I'm using the word should because I've been told they're region free. I have not verified this with my own eyes. I've never owned a TurboGrafx-16. Not to say I never will. We'll talk. But that's another video down the road. So, subscribe, I guess, if you want that story. Unfortunately, part 2, because the TurboGrafx did not sell worth a shit, and it didn't. It really didn't. Roughly 10 million units, give or take, worldwide, and easily 2/3 of those exclusive to Japan, which means mostly PC Engine. So actual legitimate TurboGrafx, branded TurboGrafx-16 hardware is incredibly difficult to find because it's incredibly rare, incredibly scarce because there's not a lot of supply. The supply does not match the demand today because of people like Pat Contry and Pixelsicle have made it more or less, popular among retro gamers who have a weird idea of the TurboGrafx-16 that doesn't match up with reality. And to be fair, I had that as well. Busting that illusion is one of the reasons why I'm pissed off at this machine. Because I actually thought it was better than it turned out that it really was. I actually, and I'll tell this piece of the story, wanted one when I was a kid. Like, actually begged my parents to buy me one, and they didn't. We got an NES instead. So, there is that. I will say, looking back on it, we dodged a bullet. But, I digress. And I'm not trying to shit on your childhood or be disrespectful. I'm just, I'm kind of blunt, in my videos. And sometimes I'm a little, I don't have a filter. I'm just going to be honest with you. You know this. You watch my videos. You know this. So I just tell it how I see it, But anyways, there are some good games on the system, don't get me wrong. The Superstar Story is good. Splatterhouse is good. Most of the Bonks are good. I'll say this. If it's a side-scrolling shooter, if it's a vertical or horizontal arcade-style shooter, chances are it's a quality game. If it's not, then it's either Splatterhouse or a Bonks adventure game. Outside of those caveats, pretty much don't waste your time, because if you're looking for a good game, you're going to be looking in the wrong place. But if you want the hardware, you don't have a lot of options, again, because, like I said, the thing didn't really light up the sales charts, which means there's no aftermarket. There are no retro clones, to my knowledge, that are compatible with turbo cards. HU cards, as they're called in the U.S. There just isn't. And I don't think that's unfortunate. I think that's a matter of no one really wants to invest the resources in cracking the technology to make a retro clone, because they know there's no demand for it, because no one will buy the thing, because no one bought the thing in the original timeline. When it was, the it thing to buy, which it was never really the it thing to buy. But when when the people making it thought it was going to be the it thing to buy. So, lack of modern options for software and lack of modern options for hardware means you're going to pay for this thing. And I mean pay out the ass. The hardware is expensive. And I mean expensive because, one, you're looking for a machine that didn't sell well, which means there's not a lot of them left. Because people, machines break down over the years. They get lost, they get burned down in houses, people give them to Goodwill, Goodwill throws them out, whatever. Things happen over the years. You're talking about something that's almost 40 years old at this point. At this point, you're rolling the dice if you even find one in good condition, whether or not it even works. So I'm just being honest with you. Good luck. And I'm being sincere. Good luck if you really want one. You're going to pay for it. They are not inexpensive. This is the rich person's 8-bit console today. Now, back in the day, it wasn't, but it is today because it's hella expensive, because you're trying to find a working machine that's in good condition. There isn't a lot of supply. It's going to cost you some money. Same with the software. The good games, the games you're going to want to play, you better have some savings bonds put aside if you want to buy those games, especially the CD games that you're going to want to buy. But we'll talk about the CD another day, because it's its own software library, it's its own hardware thing, so that's a whole separate topic, a whole nother video. So again, your best bet, since retro clones are out and modern options like compilations or digital stores are not likely to have the software you're looking for, that leaves you with emulation. And I'm here to burst your bubble once again. The emulator is not free. The asshole son of a bitch piece of human scum that wrote the TurboGrafx emulator thinks he has ownership of the intellectual property of Hudson Soft and NEC, and he charges money for his emulator. And it's the only emulator of any emulator ever that is not freely available. Now, I'm here to tell you, you can very easily crack the fucking thing. But because the selfish, greedy son of a bitch charges people money for an emulator of a system nobody fucking owned, he's an asshole. And he's a straight up asshole because he has no right to charge money for something he didn't fucking own. If you're going to write an emulator, you're doing it for the preservation of the hardware and software and for the knowledge. You're not doing it to make money, you dipshit son of a bitch. Fuck you, eat shit and choke on it. Now, I have not looked for a TurboGrafx emulator since probably 2008, 9, 10 maybe, to be honest. It's probably been a while. It's been a few years. So I don't know if this has changed. I don't know if that fuckwad has died since then and people have cracked his code. Someone else took up the mantle and decided to program a TurboGrafx emulator. I don't know why they would. I don't know if he changed his mind or got sued or went to prison or whatever, and the emulator is now freely available. I'm just going to say he was a scumbag for selling it and trying to lock it, but it was easy to crack anyways. And I'm going to tell you how to crack it. I'm going to tell you how to crack it in this fucking video because he can eat shit and lick my balls. My girl balls. It's very simple. Download the emulator. And all you have to do, there's a Sega Genesis emulator that uses the same GUI, the same format as the Turbo emulator. Download the plugins, and I'm not going to tell you how to find them, but there are plugins for the KEGA emulator, the Kiga Fusion emulator for the Sega Genesis family, 16-bit family. It can also emulate Master System and Sega CD and Game Gear on top of Genesis and 32X, and it's functional and it's free. But there's a pack of plugins for the thing. If you put those plugins in your plugin folder in the TurboGrafx emulator, it will unlock it. So, I don't know if that method still works. I don't know if he figured that out, that was working. But that's how I did it back in the day, and it worked. You can also, find cracked versions of the emulator out there if you look hard enough, if you know where to look. Now, I don't know about MAME, because at the time I was into emulation, heavy into emulation, I should say, when I was emulating everything and I had to play TurboGrafx games for whatever reason. There were no... MAME didn't emulate consoles at the time. They had a separate emulator called MESS, M-E-S-S, that they eventually folded into the main MAME. So I don't know if the MAME TurboGrafx emulator was ever functional or fully developed. So that could be a possibility. You'll just have to look into that yourself. So, going above and beyond that, like I said, you really don't have a lot of options, but if you are motivated, your best bet's going to be eBay and gaming conventions if you're looking for hardware and software, you're trying to get a deal. Make friends with the sellers, offer them something in trade, do them a favor, post YouTube videos reviewing video games and ask friends to donate you cartridges. That might be your best bet. Because these things are almost impossible to find. I've never seen one in the wild, ever. At a used video game store, or a thrift store, or a pawn shop, or whatever. So, like I said, good luck in your hunt if you really want one, but I'm not spending any more breath on this piece of shit. My advice is just don't fucking waste your time. But it isn't because the machine isn't worth it or because there's no software. It's just because there was no interest in it back in the day. This is the last thing I'm going to say. And because of that, it's just not worth what you're going to pay for these games. You're going to spend $500 on a copy of Bonks 3, and you're going to play it for 5 minutes, and you're going to want that $500 back. And when you find out you could have just emulated it. No, I guess not. you're going to just be like, well, shit, what do I do? Well, what you do is you play Nintendo or Sega, and then you just forget about TurboGrafx 16. That's what you do.